Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Tuesday, November 9th, 2021. I'm your host, George Kerth, here joined by the other two amigos. We got Tyler Snyder in the house. Tyler, how are you?
I've been better, but I'm good. I'm kicking, as we'll say, with one leg.
Only with 1 foot.
I hope you're not kicking, actually. And we got Cody Roadcap as well. Cody, what is up?
Hey, doing pretty good. I mean, what happened this weekend with daylight saving time? So many upsets. What a wild week in the NFL.
Yes, it was, and we will cover some of that and more when we do some NFL news and notes from around the league. We're going to talk Week 10 waivers, and we're going to talk the whole first half of the season with some extra mid-season debates. Figured with Tyler back, it's a good time to get a little bit aggressive and do some debates here. Make sure you find us on thecouchgms.com and our social media channels for even more info than you get just from the podcast. But with no further ado, let's jump in to NFL news. NFL news, will start out with some Monday Night Football news that you guys know how it came out a lot faster than we did here. We had the Bears activated David Montgomery before the game on Monday night. Obviously, we don't know how he did. We are recording this before Monday Night Football, but we got to talk here. Do you think that he's going to jump right in? Do you think Khalil Herbert is droppable now on your fantasy teams?
I think, especially with the Bears having a bye in week 10, that Herbert is pretty much droppable at this point. I think after week 11, that Montgomery will be the full-time starter, getting pretty much most of the work. Herbert might get sprinkled in there, so it might actually hurt Montgomery's ceiling, as we saw earlier in the season when he was getting all the workload. But he should be the number one guy, and Herbert probably goes at least to your bench, if not to the waiver wire.
Yeah, I agree there with Cody. I would kind of attribute it to kind of like a Dearness Johnson kind of thing. So you have a team that had somebody step in and do really well in the absence of their star. So they don't want to completely bench him. It's not fair to the guy who stepped up, but he's not going to get enough to make himself fantasy relevant or even ownable. So you can go ahead and drop him.
Definitely agree with you both there. And I think that's about all we can say without knowing what happened on Monday night. So we can move on to the much more interesting news. We talked a lot about Odell Beckham last week. He is officially on waivers. And I just want to hear from you guys. Where do you think his next team will be?
I don't know.
It's tough to it's tough to tell. I know on Sunday Night Football, Mike Florio said the three teams with the most interest was the 49ers, the Saints, and the Seahawks, with his preferred destination being the Seahawks. The 49ers, Kyle Shanahan did say they're not going to put in a waiver claim, so they're going to wait till free agency to make a move, if that's even possible. I know that's what Odell Beckham wants. Tyler brought up a good point. Are the Seahawks a contender? Like, we thought he'd want to go to a contender, go to a team where he could make money on. The Seahawks with already Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf doesn't seem like a great fit for a guy that wants to be the number one guy on a contending team. But maybe he goes there. If he goes there, he's probably not much fantasy relevant, and that hurts all you Tyler Lockett owners out there. But other than that, the 49ers, the Saints, I think the Saints would probably be like my favorite fit, especially with Michael Thomas no longer coming back this season. I would have to say he's probably my favorite team. Outside, of course, like, as much as we joke around, I'd love Odell Beckham in Green Bay. I think that would be fun. I know a few years ago, Adams did comment on one of his posts, let's turn the face mask green. Maybe I'm holding on to too much hope. I think Odell Beckham isn't what he used to be in his New York days, but he's still young enough that he can regain some fire and, start building back his reputation. But remember, Odell Beckham isn't the same guy. So even if he does get signed to a team, most likely he's not jumping right into like top 5 wide receiver status.
Yeah, I don't understand it because, like you said, he said he wants to go to a contender, and really the Seahawks and the 49ers both don't look like contenders right now. They could be down the stretch. They could, Seahawks are getting Russ back. They could make a run, but if he went to the Seahawks and that's his favorite landing spot, if he had to battle with Lockett and Metcalf, really, what kind of work would he even be getting? The Saints, I think, are his best chance out of those three for being a contender. They're still not the best team in their division, and they're going to be even less of a contender without Jameis Winston. So I'm curious to see how much he really wants to go there without Winston there now too. But I don't understand his thought process saying I want to go to a contender and then saying, yeah, this 3 and 5 team is my ideal landing spot. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I was banging the table for the Saints to go get someone like an Allen Robinson, and now not having Michael Thomas the rest of the year, that definitely is the destination that makes the most sense to me too. I'd love to see that one happen. I'm gonna throw the dark horse out there of the Patriots because they don't have a solidified wide receiver, and they're actually only a half game behind the Bills right now in the division. I mean, I obviously don't think the Bills are going to give that division up, but you could consider the Patriots a contender because they're in line for a wild card spot right now too. So that'd be my dark horse destination from someone that hasn't been mentioned yet with Odell Beckham.
I think you always have to, take account for the Patriots. But since we're on the Patriots, I'm gonna hop off to a side train. Did you guys see the rolling ankle of Mac Jones on Brian Burns? Have you guys seen that clip at all? Where he said he thought it was like a strip sack fumble, where he said he thought Brian Burns had the ball, so he tried to tackle him. But when he tackled him, he grabbed his foot and like rolled on it, and then Burns left the game with an ankle injury. Like, there's people saying he needs to be suspended for a game for a dirty hit. I'll retweet it on Twitter for anyone listening, but you can definitely see like it almost looks instinctive. So that's something we'll have to watch out there. Mac Jones could be potentially getting a suspended. There's no news from the league. That's just what a lot of people in the media are saying based on it, quote unquote, being a dirty hit. Now, if they come out and say he thought the guy had the ball and he was trying to make a tackle, they might like let it slide. But it's something to watch out there with that one. But one more news, real quick. We'll stay talking quarterbacks. Russell Wilson dropped a return video on his social media channels because he's returning from a finger injury. And this video had as much drama like he just returned from like leg reconstruction, like the same level as Alex Smith. Like, that's the vibes I got from this video. But Russell Wilson will be back. He'll be playing in week 10. If you're a fantasy owner, Tyler Lockett can go back into your starting lineup if you feel confident. It might be a slow first half, until he gets comfortable. I know he was working through those ghost 2-minute drills before the games and pregame warm up. But Russell Wilson is back. Guys, excited to see Russell back in Seattle. Besides Tyler, because he hates Seattle.
I don't hate Seattle as much anymore. I hated him more with the Richard Sherman and the Legion of Boom. I hated that. I don't know. They were all a bunch of jerks. I think it's settled down a lot more now. They're a lot more fun to watch. I like DK Metcalf a lot. A big fan of his. Russ is honestly, it's kind of hard not to root for Russ. But I have concerns because we've seen what happens when quarterbacks take time off and come back expecting to be huge. I mean, look at Dak Prescott this week. He took 1 week off, came back out, and just looked like he took a month off. And now you have Russ, who actually did take a month off, coming back. Like, I think there might be some rust in there for Russ. Rusty Russ, I think he's going to come out. I think he's going to struggle a little bit. I don't think DK and Lockett are going to put up the kind of numbers that you're really expecting this week.
And not really the time for it to happen going up against Green Bay. I'm not saying Green Bay has the most blow you away defense, but they played really well against Kansas City this week. So I think there's a chance there could be some rusty rust happening this week. But it's nice to see him back and see that you could have someone like DK Metcalf could be a little bit more consistent for you down the stretch. Tyler Lockett could be. I would just weigh your options this week, and we can talk about that more definitely when we do our preview show later this week.
Yeah, George, so why don't we move on from NFL news, get to your favorite segment, Quotes of the Week.
Quotes of the week, and I know, Tyler, you haven't been around for a lot of quotes of the week, and this is one of your dudes. So you know what? I'm just going to let you take away our first quote here.
All right, I'll take it. He is one of my dudes, one of my guys. It is A.J. Brown talking about Jalen Ramsey, and this week he said, I don't mind the chirping, but little things after the play, little dirty stuff, I'm not going to go for it. I'm a man first. I'm here to play football. I'm not trying to fight nobody. I'm not talking shit. You can bleep that. He has my number. He can call me if he wants to meet up after the game. Yeah, and I find it even funnier that before the game, his quote was, I know Jalen Ramsey's game. I know he just tries to get in everybody's head, and I'm not going to let that get to me. If he starts trying to get in my head, I'm just going to walk back to the huddle like nothing happened, and then there he is on the field fighting with Jalen Ramsey. So that clearly didn't work. But hey, I thought it was a fun battle. I would say it would be a nice rivalry, but AFC to NFC, probably won't see him again till the Super Bowl if they both make it.
Oh,
Was Ramsey around when AJ Brown was he was still on the Jags? Was AJ Brown there, or was that
No,
before?
that was before.
Okay,
And I didn't say they will both make it, Cody.
so that was
Before
probably
you
the
start
first
saying
time.
I'm getting too bold and everything, I just said if
I
they
was
both
going to
made
ask
it.
you: are you going to lock that in? Rams Titans Super Bowl rematch, right here, right now.
Ooh.
No, I don't think
Okay,
so.
he's not going to do it.
I love the Titans. I think we have a chance to make a run for the Super Bowl. Are we the best team in the AFC? That's up for debate. But I don't think the Rams are going to make it. I don't think Matt Stafford's good enough. And I know I talk a lot of smack on Matt Stafford, but in his entire career, he has never once beaten the Titans. So I got room to talk smack. So
He hasn't met many opportunities either, but we'll just let that one slide. I want to talk about one of our men, Tim Patrick, because I feel like I don't see Tim Patrick as one of those edgy guys, but he came
It's the
out and
name.
talked about Dallas. It's definitely the name. It's got to be like when you have multiple first names, you just don't come off as that guy that gets angry or, all uptight about things. But he talked about Dallas going for a lot of fourth down attempts early in the game and passing over on field goal attempts, which could have actually shifted the momentum of the game, but we'll ignore that. He said that, I'm going to bleep myself, disrespectful. They trying us, and that's what happens when you try us. So apparently Denver's playing with an edge this week. I also heard a quote that I could not find, unfortunately, for the show about them playing with an edge because they lost Von Miller. So Denver doesn't see themselves as out of this, even though they were sellers at the deadline.
Yeah, I mean Denver, like you mentioned, they seem to have a chip on their shoulder. It almost looked like moving on from Von Miller, which is going to sound crazy, like boosted their team. It seemed like I know there was a little bit of rumblings of some potential, like Von Miller mad at his teammates over lack of them wanting to help pay for a Halloween party. I don't have any sources to confirm that, but I know there was some rumblings online right before the trade happened. So maybe it is a move that brought the locker room together. Maybe it was a move to help the young guys be like, it's our time to shine now. And it might just be one game, but they definitely balled out this week against the Cowboys and let a lot of people know that, hey, we might have traded arguably our best player, but we're still a very good football team.
and honestly, I think it's been time to get rid of Von Miller for a while. I just feel like Von Miller and Denver haven't really been meshing too well the last couple of years. And it's not that Von Miller wasn't playing well enough, but I really feel like he deserved a change of pace, a new scenery, a new fresh start. I think it'll really help with his career, and I think having a guy like Von Miller was kind of just, the Broncos were just holding on to the past of that Super Bowl victory they had before, where it's time to really cut ties with that. Time is over. It's time for a fresh start. It's time to move forward and push for a new victory in the future. So I think it was a good move for both teams, honestly, morale wise.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see it. Time will tell because he did not make his Rams debut this week. He's still dealing with injury, but it could end up working out for both teams. I'm glad to see Denver is not acting like they're out of it. But we are going to talk about waivers in a bit, but I think it'd be fun for us to jump in first to our little mid-season review.
Let's do it.
All right. And we'll talk a little bit of actual football as well, but we'll start with fantasy because that's what most of you are here for. I'm just gonna throw out there the first question: who would be your first half fantasy MVP? Cody, you start us off.
Cooper Kupp.
Well, way to go to the obvious answer.
Well, I'm sorry, but he has been a guy drafted behind Robert Woods. They thought he'd be the second guy coming out leading I believe he still leads the league in receiving yards after this week. I know despite he had 15 points in half point PPR, which was a down week we're talking about for Cooper Kupp this week. I know for us personally, those 4.5 points he scored in the last drive cost me a victory. It gave Tyler a victory. It gave my fiance a victory. So he was very important in getting at least 3 victories despite having a down week amongst the Couch GMs and their significant others. So it's Cooper Kupp, MVP. He's balling out. Number 1 wide receiver, a guy that you were getting in what, the 4th, 5th round?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt he's definitely probably your MVP, but I was just hoping to get a little more creative. I'll get a little creative and hear me out. My first half MVP is Derrick Henry, because I know there's actually somebody in our league of record who now is in trouble because he lost Derrick Henry. He lost Henry Ruggs as well, but he's in the playoffs already just because Derrick Henry won him so many games already. So, like, I know it stinks because he's not going to be the season-long MVP. He's not going to help you in the second half. But this man probably got fantasy teams into the playoffs just because of how well he did in the first half.
Yeah, I agree with you. You kind of took my pick there. I was hoping you guys would let it slide that I
Oh,
picked a
sorry.
guy who was on IR. But look, he has missed this week because of the injury, and yet he is still the number 2 player in all of fantasy, points wise. Like, this guy has single handedly won a bunch of people weeks and put up monster numbers. And like George said, just having him not there for 1 week, a lot of teams are plummeting in the power rankings in their own squad, are scrambling to find anything they possibly can uh, to replace him because of how valuable he was to their team. You can't find a guy like him anymore. Everybody else is splitting. They're inconsistent. They're not able to put up those big numbers when you need them. So I 100% agree with you there, George. Um, I'm between two guys. I'll tell you, my other guy was Jonathan Taylor, because of the fact that you were able to take him at the end of the first round after guys like Zeke, after guys like Barkley, after guys like Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb, and yet he is looking like the better of all those running backs the way he's looking right now, obviously with Derrick Henry out for the year. But Jonathan Taylor is consistently getting great yards per carry. He's heavily utilized in his offense. He's catching passes, running the ball well. So I definitely think he deserves a shout out. However, the guy I'm going to go with is Jamar Chase. And hear me out. The reason why I'm going with Jamar Chase is because, Cooper Kupp, great pick, but he was still in the top 3 rounds in most drafts, maybe the 4th round, depending on how far he may have fell. Derrick Henry was an easy first round pick. Jamar Chase was going mid rounds. He was not going very high because they had 3 wide receivers. They didn't know who was going to be the guy. I've seen some drafts where he slid almost at the end of the draft because people didn't want to trust a rookie receiver to ball out, but he has been one of the best wide receivers in the league. And other than, this week where he struggled, he's been very, very consistent on a weekly basis. So, being able to take a guy that late that can still win you games, I think he definitely deserves a shout out for fantasy MVP since you guys took the obvious ones.
Yeah, I agree. We did take the obvious ones. There's not really much debate there, but I'm glad you brought up Jamar Chase because our next category was biggest surprise, and that was going to be my guy. Like you just mentioned, everything you said, why it fits for Jamar Chase. But since you took him for MVP, I'll pivot here at the last second
Don't you take
and
my
take
guy,
the
I swear
guy
to
that
God.
I'm not going to take. Is what position does he play?
Running back.
Okay, good. I'm going to take a quarterback,
All
and
right.
it's the guy throwing the ball to Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow.
Oh,
Currently sitting in the top 10 of quarterbacks, often went undrafted. We were concerned about him coming back from the ACL injury. There was a lot of criticism that the team didn't take a guy to protect him, and he's been balling out. He up until this week, he had at least 2 touchdowns in every game this season. He's been throwing the ball over the yard, getting confidence, looking better, and supporting a top 3 fantasy wide receiver in Jamar Chase, along with startable weeks for his other 2 guys in Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins. Now they're more boom or bust. Like 1 week it's Boyd, the next week it's Higgins, but he's still putting up some serious fantasy points. So maybe I'm just saying the Bengals are the biggest surprise to the whole NFL. But Jamar Chase definitely, and the guy throwing to him have been huge surprises this season so far.
Well, I'm going to steal the second one.
Tyler, I'll let you go for me just so I don't take you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. It's just because it's George's guy, and I want to make sure I steal him from George. And I 100% think he was going to say this guy, and it's Corduro Patterson.
I'm sure.
Yep, there it is. I knew it because Cordero Patterson was on no one's radar. Every year there's somebody that is picked up off free agency that can win you leagues, and this year Cordero Patterson is that guy. I made fun of George a little bit when he kept saying, like, guys, you got to look at Cordero Patterson. You got to look at him. In the first 2 weeks, I was like, it's Patterson. Like, he's not going to do that much. And I was like, what do I need yet another bench receiver for? And then he pointed out the fact that in NFL.com leagues, this dude's listed as a running back. Game changer. Hey, guys, he has 1 week all year where he had 7.7. That's the only week all year where he has not broken 10 points in fantasy. He has gotten double-digit points every single week since week 1. Biggest fantasy surprise has to be Patterson.
Yeah, I was going to say Patterson. You got me.
I got to ask you a question though, because I know for me, I agree he's been a huge surprise. But I'm still struggling to trust him for the rest of the season. Like he's not a guy I'm trading for.
Cody, get on the
He's not a guy
bandwagon.
he's a guy I'm trying to move if I have him in any leagues, if I was able to get him. Like I know he's putting up number, but it's still like it's just a guy that's hard for me to trust. Is that just me, or is that you guys thinking the same thing too?
There's always going to be a little bit of something in the back of my mind saying, I don't know if I should trust him or not. But look, he has permanently implanted himself in my starting lineup until he proves me otherwise. If he faces a matchup that I truly don't think he can put up any points, which look, out of his last 2 weeks, he played the number 4 ranked Saints and the number 3 ranked Panthers against the run. Granted, he is a running back receiver, but those are two of the better defenses he's going to face, and he put up 16 and 15. So he's facing these top defense. He's still getting points. The Falcons want to use him. They just do. It's in the run game, sure. It's in the pass game, sure. And the other reason why I'd say trust him is like, who else do they have? Mike Davis is not doing anything this year. He has not been what we expect him to be. He might be a guy used in the fantasy disappointment segment coming up. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. But he has been so disappointing this year. You have Calvin Ridley, who stepped away for mental health issues, so they don't have their biggest pass catcher. Kyle Pitts is awesome some weeks. Other weeks he's nothing. Like he's inconsistent. So Patterson's their go-to guy. It's the guy they want to run the offense through. So I think you have to trust him.
Everything you just said. I mean, obviously, you're never going to feel 100% confident because of Cordero Patterson being in the league so long and not being used correctly so long. But he finally found the fit that he's been looking for. So I don't see any reason why I should be doubtful on him until he gives me a reason to. And he's just not giving me a reason to.
Okay, but
But
is he a guy you'd
okay,
actively go out and try to trade for?
at this point, yes, I would. He's a top 10 running
In
back.
our league of record, George mentioned that there is somebody that had Derrick Henry, has no running backs, and is actively looking for a running back now because he's struggling. He approached me because I have like 8 different running backs, and one of the guys he wanted from me was Cordero Patterson. He was actively trying to go after him, and I wouldn't move him. He, out of all the guys I have, he seeked out Patterson, and I just flat out said no. Like, I'm not moving him. So yeah, I think he is a guy that people are trying to actively move for, because one of the biggest things with running backs, and especially with all the committees right now, is consistency. Uh, it's hard to find anybody with consistency. I mean, look at, I'll just use a guy from my team because I know him, Zeke. Like, Zeke will go out there and give you 25 points one week, and then he'll give you 4 the next week. Like, trying to find a guy that has consistent points every week is so hard. Do you want to go out and seek a guy who might be able to get you 30 points in the playoffs, maybe a 20-point matchup? Absolutely. But if you tell me there's a running back right now that you can go get maybe cheaper than one of those top guys, and he's going to give you 15 points every single week without a doubt, yeah, I'm going to get him.
Yeah, definitely. I'm in the same page as you.
Gotcha. I'm still going to stick with it. He's not. I completely understand what you're saying. Running backs are hard to come by. I mean, he's essentially a wide receiver. His running back skills aren't. I mean, he had 10 yards on 9 attempts on Sunday. So when you're comparing him to running back stats, like compare him as a wide receiver, you just get the luxury of playing him in a running back spot, which is a huge benefit. I will agree with that. But it's still the Falcons. I know they're currently sitting in a playoff spot, and it's still Cordero Patterson. It's still a team I just don't have a lot of faith in. And I mean, just where I'm at. It's not a guy I'm actually trying to trade for. But to your point though, like if there is a guy, out there that's trying to move somebody that you have, and they're offering you Cordero Patterson for a guy that's not as consistent, you might make a look at it. It's not like I'm saying anti trade him, but I'm also but I'm more of the standpoint of let's trade him for bigger value if you can make that happen. But I feel like at least in our league and most leagues that I'm in this year, trading has been like at a minimum. Like nobody wants to trade.
It's so
So we're
hard
talking
this
about
year.
trades, and
It
so
is.
maybe trades aren't even an option in your league. But George, we still haven't gotten to your biggest surprise of the
Mhm.
NFL season or fantasy season, I should say.
And I'm gonna say I get that his numbers are skewed because he had a big game this past week, but James Conner is somebody that none of us saw coming. He was behind Chase Edmonds. He still kind of is behind Chase Edmonds, but all this man does is score touchdowns. And because of that, we'll take the first 2 weeks off the board because he was still getting used to the offense, still getting worked in. He's only scored under 10 fantasy points 1 week,
Besides the first
and
two
it was
weeks,
against Cleveland. What was that?
didn't you just say take the first 2 weeks off the?
Take the first 2 weeks off because he was getting into the offense. Ever since then, he's only scored under 10 fantasy points one time. And this man is now a top 10 running back. And Chase Edmonds is hurt, so we don't know how that's going to go. But James Conner was also somebody who was drafted so late. And now all of a sudden, anybody that took that flyer on him or picked him up after the first 2 weeks if somebody dropped him has a solid starting running back. He's somebody who's flown under the radar. Even we haven't talked about James Conner too much, and he's been solid.
I dropped him in a league after the first 2 weeks, so that's fun.
I'm just saying it's kind of funny, and I know we're doing a little bit of debate here, and I completely get what you're saying. But you said throughout the first 2 weeks and then only one game, so that's 33% of the games he's had less than 10 points. So it's definitely you trying to like. I understand what you're saying. Like, don't get me wrong, but just as devil's advocate, but you did bring up a good point that we didn't hit on quite yet because we're going to save it for waivers. But Chase Edmonds, he's out the next 4 weeks, so that's a solid running back moving forward. A guy you might even be able to.
He is 90% owned, but
I know, but he's even a guy you might even be able to trade for after a huge week. You know, if you could trade James Conner for Corduro Patterson, if somebody would do that, even a guy I just said I'm not a huge fan of Cordero Patterson, I like him better long term than James Conner. So give or take, but I agree with you. Big surprise, huge week this week. But we did just talk a little bit of surprises. Now we always have to go to
Hold on. Before we move
disappointments.
on, I want to play a little more devil's advocate here, Cody, just because I'm curious about
okay.
George's thoughts. So fine, we'll throw out the first 2 weeks. Okay, cool.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna read you the rushing yards every week from James Conner. We got 43, 50, 29, 71, 64, 22, and then this week when he was the only back, he had 96. He does have some receiving stats in there somewhere. Mostly this week where he had 77. Otherwise, best receiving yards he had in a week was 16. This dude has 11 touchdowns on the year, but he has
Mhm.
like no
That's the
yards
surprise.
or usage. Like he's definitely
All he does is score
it's
touchdowns.
super impressive that he's getting 11 touchdowns, but Patterson I liked because he gets so much volume, and that's why I like his
Mhm.
value. Do you still trust James Conner moving forward, thinking he can keep up the amount of touchdowns that he's getting? I mean, assuming that Edmonds isn't going to be out long term, which I don't think he will be, but I have to wait for the
3 to
injury
4
report on
weeks
it.
is what I was
4 to 4.
seeing.
So he'll be back by the fantasy playoffs. Like, is Conner a guy you trust long term, knowing that he's been mostly touchdown dependent, or do you think he'll be more heavily involved?
I mean, he's definitely going to be more heavily involved until Edmonds comes back. Even after, I mean, if he keeps up the pace that he's at, he's going to demand a couple of extra carries between the 20s. I know it's scary going with somebody who's so touchdown dependent, but when you look at Arizona, when they get into the red zone, it seems like their options are throw a ball to AJ Green, which doesn't even happen as often as we wish, or it's going to be a rushing touchdown with either James Conner or Kyler Murray. When he's in the top two, and you can say maybe potentially three, top two options for a touchdown every single time a potent offense gets into the red zone, he's gonna have a big bulk of touchdowns. So like I'm confident moving forward, just knowing how the Cardinals offense works and how important it is that they get him the ball in the red zone. And I think if he demands any more carries between the 20s, just because he does well while Edmonds is out, it's just an extra bonus.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
I think you're a little bit overexcited for him, and maybe it's warranted. Maybe I'll be wrong. I think it's also worth noting that this was his huge week that we're coming off of. So there's some recency bias, and they were
Definitely. I could see
missing
that.
Kyler Murray, AJ Green, and DeAndre Hopkins, and then Chase Edmonds got out. So he became the focal point of the offense. How much will he still be in contention once Kyler Murray comes back, DeAndre Hopkins comes back, AJ Green gets back? It's something to keep an eye on. Again, if you have him, look to trade him. We talked about trades not happening a lot in leagues.
Mhm.
It feels like he's a guy I would definitely try to trade high after this big week, and especially using the Edmonds. But I think I tend to agree with Snyder that, especially with Edmonds coming back, fantasy playoffs, he's not a guy that I trust long term. And still 11 touchdowns, like, I feel like that's a incredible pace to keep up over the second half of the season. Like, essentially that put him at 22, which I'm assuming would be a record.
Yeah, and uh, one more thing before we move on, real quick. I just want to throw out my extra guy, just because I'm that kind of a person. The guy that I was going to hit on if George stole Patterson from me, because I took him as Mr. Irrelevant in a draft, and I saw him going in the last few rounds. Debo Samuel, um, the resurgence of Debo Samuel. He's been a top fantasy wide receiver. Really came back this year, and I love to see it from him. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Debo as an honorable mention here.
Very true. Very true. And I think that's actually a good way for us to go into biggest disappointment, because my biggest disappointment goes along with that, and he was one of my guys, and I'm just going to start it off with Brandon Ayuk. I don't even really know if I have to say too much more. I'm hoping that his little semi-breakout this week turns into a better second half, but there's no doubt that he was really the most disappointing player, in my opinion, in the first half. He just didn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, on the bright side, though, he had 2 good weeks. Debo is dealing with a little bit of injury, so maybe he'll start to bounce back. But I agree with you. He was a guy. Now, again, if you listen to the podcast, we would have told you it was probably a better value to not take Ayuk in the 3rd and the 4th round when you were taking Cooper Kupp and all those guys, and come and save the 6th and 7th round for Debo Samuel. So just remember to keep listening to the cap,
Or the 15th, apparently.
or round 15 if you're drafting with whoever Tyler was drafting with. But that's a good segue. I'm going to stick with another wide receiver for my disappointment. I don't know if I can out top Brandon Ayuk, but another guy I'm going to talk about is Robbie Anderson. Now, he was I believe he was a top 24 wide receiver last year with Teddy Bridgewater. We were expecting him getting reunited with Sam Darnold, who he was good for fantasy and in the NFL in New York under Adam Gase. We thought bringing him in there would make him be, another top guy. We were debating Robbie Anderson or DJ Moore. Who's the guy it's going to be? And, well, hopefully you pick DJ Moore, because Robbie Anderson has been a huge disappointment. Currently sitting as wide receiver 67. He's getting like 1 to 2, like 3 targets max. He can't catch anything. Man, it's just been a rough season. He's only averaging 4.7 points this season per game, and that's half point PPR. So huge disappointment for Robbie Anderson. I don't have much else to add to that. I mean, it's close between Robbie Anderson and Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, guys, I want to shift away from wide receiver, but I just feel like there's too many guys to use. I'm going to give a quick hit to Kenny Galladay, because I had such high hopes for him. I should have seen it coming. I know Cody listed him as one of the fantasy busts this year to be aware of, and he was right. Galladay, I know he's been dealing with injuries, but even when he is healthy, he just hasn't performed up to the level that I've been hoping. But my fantasy disappointment is actually going to be a guy who's ranked in the top 25 at his position, so it's going to seem a little off, but I'm going Stephon Diggs. Like, the dude, just because of the value that you took him at and what you expected him to be, he is ranked 22nd at wide receiver. He does break 10 most weeks. He is fairly consistent, so it's hard to list him as a disappointment, but the guy's only broken 100 yards receiving one time, and all season. And that week, he only got 14 points because he didn't score a touchdown. He only has 3 touchdowns on the entire season. Like, the guy really is not putting up the stats that we saw from him last year. He really is not giving you the big games. I know I said consistency is usually better than the big games, but Diggs was the kind of guy that was consistently giving you 20, with occasionally giving you 30 to 35 with those massive games. And this season, he's consistently giving you 10 and never giving you the big week. So I say one of the biggest disappointments has been Stephon Diggs so far.
Yeah,
I like how you skewed that because I've thought about him too, and like, oh, but then you still see he's like 22nd in overall scoring, and you're like, oh no, he's doing all right. But you're right, like it's almost like those first round running backs everyone says busts, but really they're playing like a third round running back, and it's just because of the expectations. We don't think about wide receivers that way, but you're 100% right. We should be thinking about Stephon Diggs that way.
absolutely. I mean, back in draft season, it was like, is Stephon Diggs wide receiver one? Like, there's people taking him over Devonte Adams, over Tyreek Hill, who guys that have had some inconsistent weeks, but they're still sitting in the top 5 wide receiver options. Like, you expected Diggs to be up there. I do like him. I do know, like you said, he is still getting 10 points. I know the Bills have been down a little bit the rest of the season. He was in consideration for our next topic, but I'm not going to pick him for my guy rest of the season. I do like him as a potential buy low candidate for the rest of the season. He gets a lot of air yards. I think he could be a guy down the stretch that could be beneficial, but you're absolutely right in the sense that we drafted him at most. Like, he went in a 12-team draft, he was probably going in the first round or in the first 3 picks of the second round. So definitely disappointed from the guy that you took that early in the draft.
Absolutely, Cody. And you know what? You hinted at it. So
Definitely.
let's just go ahead and move on to the next segment. And that is the fantasy my guy, the guy that you believe in going down the stretch. Could be a guy that struggled, could be a guy that's good. You just think is going to become great. George, why don't you go ahead and start us off with the my guy since your person got stolen last round?
All right, that sounds good. And I'm part of me's thinking I should not pick a my guy from my team of record because my guys at the beginning of the season ended up so bad. But I'm going to try to throw some good juju at somebody that we liked in the preseason who's really broken out. That's Michael Pittman. We said it's impossible to find a number one wide receiver that late in the draft. He has now really built up a rapport with Carson Wentz. He's come on even more as of the last 3 weeks. So I just have this feeling that people are still sleeping on him. Cody's been kind of was building up my confidence a few weeks ago. Now I'm all on board. He could be a wide receiver 2, borderline wide receiver 1 down the stretch if he keeps up this stretch that he's had the last 3 weeks. All in on Michael Pittman.
Cody?
Hey, it's a great pick. I appreciate you giving me the shout out there. My guy, I'm struggling because, like you, I wasn't 100% sure on who to pick, who to go with. Do I want to go with someone on my league of record team? Does that make it bad juju? Um, but I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to go a little bit of a stretch. And, I talked about Stephon Diggs, being a guy I like down the stretch. I'm going to stick with that same offense, a guy that's currently injured and at a position that is terrible to play with, and that is Dawson Knox.
Ooh.
I think he was the tight end 4 when he got hurt. He was putting up decent numbers. They were getting him involved. He's a part of the reason why there's been a dip in Stephon Diggs' point. I did see an interview that Josh Allen has Dawson Knox on his fantasy team. So take that with whatever you need. If Josh Allen's got him, he's looking for him in the red zone. I like Dawson Knox. Hopefully the hand comes back. He was out for 3 weeks. I wish they would have put him on IR so I didn't have to hold a bench spot for him, but I wouldn't cut Dawson Knox because I like him the rest of the season. I think he'll be a viable tight end option. And then, and honestly, if he doesn't pan out well, he's just another tight end that hasn't panned out, like pretty much every tight end this season. So he's a guy that could be consistently good for you down the stretch.
All right. I'm going to shift a little bit. I was going to stick with that position. A fantasy my guy was going to be Pat Fryermuth, who has really come alive in the last couple of weeks. I know rookie tight ends have bad juju in general, but Pitts really hasn't had a bad year, although tight ends still have. So maybe this is the year we break the curse of the rookie tight end, and Fryermuth will have a good second half. But I'm going to shift away a little bit and look, it's going to sound like I'm just being a homer, but I'm not. I promise you, this is just as a fantasy player. My fantasy, my guy is Julio Jones. I know it's easy to say AJ Brown. Uh, if I was going to be a homer, because he is the number one on that offense, but you got to think defenses are looking at a team like the Titans who have been scoring a lot. Um, and how do you stop them? You're going to look at the Titans' schedule. And
Hamstrings.
guys, we were looking at it earlier in the year or earlier in the day, and Titans' schedule is easy. Yes, Julio has had hamstring injuries this season, but he played all last night. He felt fine coming off the game. It looks like he might finally be healed up from those. So AJ Brown's going to be the top guy they're going to try to stop, leaving Julio as the number 2. And when you have a guy who's as good as Julio Jones as a number 2 receiver, finally healthy, getting that number 2 corner, this dude should be able to eat, especially on a team that can't just focus on the run anymore. They have to throw the ball more. So I think Julio Jones is primed for a breakout second half. I'm hoping that Allen Robinson is also primed for a bigger second half now that Fields is getting more comfortable, but that's a little less likely. So my fantasy, my guy is Julio Jones. Buy low candidate.
Does, with you as the Titans fan, is that 2 top fantasy wide receivers? Are you willing? Are you saying that you think this might actually hurt AJ Brown's fantasy production just because he might be getting some more, especially with Derrick Henry out, he'll be the guy that they're trying to take away the most. I assume that's why you're going with Julio Jones. So are you worried about AJ Brown moving forward as a guy that potentially might take a step back from where he's at?
No, I would attribute it. Look, if it's easier for me to do comparisons, I know you hate comparisons, but it's easier for me to do them. So I would compare it to like the Vikings. I think AJ Brown's going to be that Justin Jefferson. He's still going to get you your bigger plays. I think he's going to be the number 1 guy you're looking at. But Adam Thielen is still a strong number 2 receiver. He is still a guy that you're going to want to play on a weekly basis. He's still going to put up the big points. And I don't feel like Adam Thielen takes away from Justin Jefferson at all. So I would say, yes, he's still going to be valuable. You're just not going to see that Dalvin Cook running the ball anymore.
And actually, despite his inconsistency, Adam Thielen's actually ahead of Justin Jefferson in points scored this year.
So far.
So far, yeah, of course. It's really close too. It's 3 points, and I feel like that's how they were last year. But you'd think it was different just because Justin Jefferson's that name.
Absolutely.
Man, we got to stop talking about Justin Jefferson. Every time we do, I get disappointed that he went right before the Packers did in the draft. But let's pivot off fantasy. Let's hit some NFL midseason review. And the teams are all over the place, so we're going to debate some best team in each conference. Are we going to say at the midseason point they're our favorite team, or are we going out on a limb and saying this is who we think is going to represent that conference in the Super Bowl? How do you want to do this? What is it, the best team right now, or which team we think is most likely to hit the Super Bowl?
I think we should probably go with best chance to hit the Super Bowl, because they could be the best team right now, but not be the best team the entire second half.
All right.
Okay. Best team to hit the Super Bowl. George, AFC.
The AFC is a mess. It should have been so deep, and now it seems like every team that hits the top hits a road bump. Buffalo. I'll stick with Buffalo. I said it for the beginning of the season. I'll stick with it now. They are dealing with a little bit of injury. They obviously lost Zach Moss to a concussion. They don't have Dawson Knox right now. Not that they don't have other weapons, but it's something that could affect them. I think they're going to get it together. Josh Allen's got to get a little bit of his mojo back, and they're going to be fine. I'm just really not confident with too many AFC teams right now. So give me Buffalo as somebody who I've seen be competitive before, and I think can make a rebound.
You know, I like Buffalo a lot. I've been saying for weeks that I think Buffalo is the favorite to win the Super Bowl, and now they are struggling. I think the easy one to go here would be Baltimore. However, hear me out. Here's my argument against them, because I'm always against them. But Baltimore has not won really any games this season decisively. I think they have one victory that wasn't a heart pounder all the way to the end. Every game they are in goes to overtime, goes to that last second field goal, goes to that miracle comeback. And it's been awesome. And it shows that Baltimore is able to win those games in the final moments when they need to pull something out, which is huge. But if you're always going down to those last second moments to try to win a game, it means you're this close to it going the other way and losing. And I think until they prove that they can be a stronger team the whole game through and really start dominating some of these teams that they should handle easier, I'm not going to go with Baltimore, although I do think they're a strong number 2 at this point. I'm going to go with Tennessee. I know it's the homer in me, but their offense looks sketchy right now without Derrick Henry, but their schedule looks juicy and their defense looks dominant. Going the best quarterback that they face the entire rest of the regular season is Mac Jones, and that's saying a lot. So if the Titans can use that defense against these poor teams, hold the other team down to 15 points, I think this offense is good enough to outscore that. Even with the missing Derrick Henry. And I think their offense will come into a rhythm. There is the potential of Derrick Henry coming into the playoffs. Um, I know his injury might be out longer than we expect. We don't know, but there is that potential. But right now, I think Tennessee, with their schedule and where they're sitting right now, they are the favorite to have a first round bye. And you give me a team with a first round bye in a conference that nobody is really solidifying themselves, I got to go with that team.
Yeah, I think if the Titans can get the bye, that would make them a tough out. Like we talked about this off air. The Titans remind me a lot of the Steelers. Like if they can hold the team to, 17, 21 points, they got a shot. If they let up many more points with their offense without Derrick Henry, I don't know if they can put up that many points, but their defense is balling out. I also agree with George. I think Buffalo has been the favorite since the beginning, and they're a team I still really like, but I'm not going to pick. I like your guys' picks better than the one I'm about to make, but just in the sense of being different for a little bit of debate. I'm going to go with another team that loves to win close games, and they're doing it this year. And last year they weren't, but this year they're doing it. They have a young quarterback that's balling out. They have some of the nicest uniforms in the league, which doesn't have anything to do with how good the football team is, but anytime you got a nice uni, you got to throw it out there. And that's the Los Angeles Chargers. You know, I still like Justin Herbert. I still like Keenan Allen. Their defense is good enough. It's good at making turnovers. Their big playability. I am a little bit worried about the Chargers if I'm playing devil's advocate in that division. I think they're going to get banged up around with the Raiders, and despite how bad Patrick Mahomes looked this past week and the Chiefs have looked in general, like I don't think you can rule them out until they're officially not in the playoffs. But for me, I'm going to go with a dark horse in the Los Angeles Chargers.
All right, well, that's enough about the AFC. So let's go ahead and move on to the NFC, which might honestly be just as difficult, but for a different reason. Instead of every team kind of showing their weaknesses and being beatable in the NFC, it's kind of like every team is looking strong. You could say that there's 6, 7, maybe even 8 teams you can make an argument for being the best team in the NFC. A lot less now after this week. But Cody, why don't you go ahead and start us off with your best team in the NFC? You going Homer?
And why is it the Packers?
Oh, absolutely. I'm going Homer. 100%. Look, the Packers, their defense is playing way better than we expected. I know the Chiefs are struggling this year, but they were struggling on defense, not as much on offense. We held them to 13 points. That was without Jair Alexander, without Zadarius Smith. We lost Kenny Clark halfway through the game. We lost Eric Stokes pregame to a freak injury. Like, we had 19 people on defense dressed in that game. That's it. Or after the injuries, like after pregame, we had 19 people available and then lost guys and people on snap counts. Still put up that performance. We went into Arizona and beat the Cardinals without Adams, without MVS, without Lazard. We beat Arizona. And the defense actually won that game too. So the Packers offense, the Packers defense, they are sitting here at 7-2 and haven't peaked yet. I feel like there's some teams we're going to talk about that might have already hit their peak or at their peak. And the Packers aren't there yet. They still have some ways to go. They're going to get players back. Hopefully Rodgers comes back off the COVID list this week. Zadarius Smith, Jair Alexander, David Bakhtiari, all pros that we're getting back to this team that's already sitting at 7-2. They're still in the hunt, especially with that win over Arizona. It could be huge for a first round bye. If we could somehow pull that off again, having teams come through Lambeau Field, I think this could be the year that we finally get over the hump, and I just do not want to lose for the third straight time in the NFC Championship game.
Yeah, I'm between a couple, so George, I'll let you go first so you purposely steal one of mine.
All right. Well, the best team in the NFC is no doubt the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions had a bye this week. They lost to them after they just got blown out by the Eagle. Okay. I was really hoping you'd go first, Tyler, because I am between a few teams too. I'm going to land on the team that Cody was trying to bash a little bit. I'll go with the Arizona Cardinals. I know that they lost to the Packers. That could be an argument of, yeah, the Packers are definitely better. But one, I can't pick the Packers if Cody did. Two, the Cardinals are just an absolutely, they're good on offense, they're good on defense, they're good on special teams. They showed their backups can win games now. I don't really see many weaknesses in the Cardinals game. They can have a bad game now and again. I'll chalk that up to what happened with the Packers, or you're going to lose to good teams sometimes, but they're deep. They play good on both sides of the ball, and they have one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the league. I don't see much of a reason why the Cardinals shouldn't be in every single game. And just because of that, I think that they have to be in consideration for best team in the NFC.
Yeah, George, to further push your point a little bit, one of the things that I like looking at the most is point differential. I know it's doesn't seem like much, but I love looking at it. It's honestly just straight up how many more points have you scored than you've given up over the season. And just to give a little insight, the Packers, yes, they did get blown out in week 1, so it's a little skewed. And they've had some closer games, but the Packers' point differential is 19. Plus 19. The second best in the NFC is the Bucks at plus 77. The Cardinals is plus 122. They have scored 122 more points than they have given up over the entire season. The Cardinals' offense is dynamic. Their defense is full of playmakers. So I agree with you, George. I think the Cardinals are definitely a strong suitor, but I'm going to go with the other one I said, which, by the way, that is the best in the NFL. Best in the AFC is the Bills at 117. Those are the only two teams over 100. But anyway, so my team, I'm going to go with the team I just mentioned with having the second best point differential, and that's the Bucks. I want to say the Rams. I think you can make a strong case for the Rams, despite losing to the Titans last night. But the Bucks still have Tom Brady. They still have elite receivers. They still have one of the best defenses. And honestly, I think they're a better team this year with Leonard Fournette running the ball than they were with Ronald Jones. They still have Ronald Jones when they need him, but I think Fournette is even better, especially the way he's performing this year. I think the Bucks, I mean, they're just it's a Tom Brady led team. Tom Brady led teams are just almost guaranteed to be in the deep playoffs, and I don't think this year is going to be any different. I'm not saying I want them to be, but I think I could definitely see the Bucks in the Super Bowl once again.
Yeah, I think the Bucks are probably the second team I'd pick. Too. I think they also benefit from recency bias of having a bye last week when all the top teams lost. Like you're like, oh, the Bucks, they're still a good game. Their team, they didn't lose when everyone else did, but they were on bye. Um, so it definitely could be them. I mean, they're going to have to fight with the Saints. I think they're still better than the Saints despite them losing to the Saints before their bye week. It's definitely going to be a Tom Brady. It's going to be tough to get out there. And you talked about the Rams, so I just want to talk about them real quick. I know I did pick the Packers. They're in a like they honestly like I like the Rams a lot too, and wouldn't be surprised if they finished with like the second best record in the NFC behind the Arizona Cardinals and end up with having to go on the road in week 1 or in week 1 of the playoffs. Like it's a tough draw for the Rams. Um, they have some tough matchups. They get to play the Packers coming up soon, so that'll be a huge game for seeding, especially if they can get that game and then get back and beat Arizona later in the week. But like you guys mentioned, there's so many teams here at the top. There's some tough matchups down. Like, and you mentioned at the top, there's the AFC. It's like which team is good and which teams aren't, and then it's like which team is great and which teams are good in the NFC. Like that's just how it seems to feel halfway through the season. It could completely flip. Injuries can be a big part of it, but I think the NFC playoff picture is going to be real fun to watch down the rest of the stretch.
Yeah, because I mean, you could make an argument for Seattle and San Francisco still. You could make an argument for the Saints before the Jameis Winston injury, and even now, maybe you can still make an argument for them. They still performed okay this week. We'll see what they can do down the stretch, but we're also not giving any love to the Cowboys. I mean, look, I know we don't like the Cowboys here, and I know they just got blown out by the Broncos, but Dak was off for a week. I think we've seen some crazy things out of the Cowboys this year, and coming from the NFC least, which has been an absolute joke the last 2 years, and no team in that division deserved any recognition. Seeing the Cowboys just kind of come alive this year and rally behind Dak after his significant injury, it is pretty cool to see, and I could see that momentum carrying them into the playoffs. And they have the offensive power and the defensive playmakers to pull off an upset in the playoffs. So we could actually see the Cowboys making a deep run. Do I see them in the Super Bowl? No, I don't see them as the best team in the NFC, but they are a team worth looking at as well. One bad week does not make a team.
No, absolutely. With the Cowboys, one thing that I saw as we were recording this, it's something to keep an eye on, though, where I'm going to get a little bit in off of best team. But Zeke is dealing with a little bit of a knee injury. It's not supposed to keep him out, but that's just something, if it could hamper him, that could increase Tony Pollard's potential there. Again, he's still supposed to play, but something to monitor as the rest of the season. He might not get as many attempts, many carries going on. Before we hit the rest of the waiver wires, real quick, let's just each go around the room. And who is the front runner for the MVP halfway through the season? George, kick it off, buddy.
MVP, got it.
NFL MVP.
Yeah, NFL MVP for this one. Just because I hope it ruffles a couple of feathers, and I don't want to say the name Tom Brady. Matthew Stafford. We all knew that he had a chance to be a completely different quarterback than he was in Detroit because he's going to a much better team. He can finally show his potential, and I think he really has. Not only has he been a really solid producer for your fantasy teams, he had taken the Rams team to another level. And I think because you've seen a good Rams team, I know they did make a Super Bowl a few years ago, but they were that playoff team that couldn't wait to make the next step. Now with Stafford in there, it seems like they're making that next step. He has a very clear thing for voters to say, I was the missing piece. I myself are making this team better. And I think that's a really solid chance for him to be the NFL MVP.
I'm just going to let Tyler respond because I got to hear this.
I definitely think he has a chance. I think Stafford, before the Sunday Night Football game, had a much better shot of winning the MVP. I know when it comes down to winning the award, a lot of people do like to look at the primetime games because it is recency bias. It's what have you seen lately? And people aren't watching the 1 o'clock games every single week to see what he's doing. They look at the stat sheet and they remember what they've seen in those primetime games when they were focused on that team. So watching Stafford make that dumb mistake of throwing it in the end zone to the Titans for that pick, followed by a pick six, and just struggling the entire game through, I think it hurts his chances, but I honestly do believe Matt Stafford has a chance. It's so hard to go onto a team that has Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Van Jefferson, Darrell Henderson, and a great defense, and suddenly look like a good quarterback. It's really impressive.
I mean, it's something that...
Was that all you could have wished for, Cody?
No, I was going to say, well, Jared Goff didn't make this team look that good, but Jared Goff was just as good, according to Tyler.
Jared Goff did before. Yeah, he had a bad year last year, but okay, we were talking about what is the greatest NFL game we've seen in the last 10 years. It was Chiefs and Rams, because who were the best two teams in the NFL? Chiefs and Rams. Who were the two highest scoring offenses in the NFL? Chiefs and Rams. Who was the Rams quarterback at the time? Jared Goff. Yes, recently he struggled, but we're talking about Jared Goff like he never had a good year with the Rams. Like, he did good things too, with just as good of players.
I would argue that team had better offensive weapons, but we don't have that much time for this debate, and you still haven't given us your MVP.
My midseason MVP, man, it's tough because Derrick Henry's out now, so I can't just hand it to him. It'd be so much easier.
That's what the Titans do. Just hand it to Derrick Henry.
I think the MVP is not best player in the league. I think it's 100% media bias, and the only two people that the media has talked about this year is Tom Brady and Matt Stafford. So I could definitely see it going to one of those two guys, but I'm going to shift it a little bit, and I'm going to go with the little guy, Kyler Murray, in my opinion. The Cardinals were really nothing last year. They still had DeAndre Hopkins last year. Yes, they had Kyler Murray. He wasn't quite hitting it on all strides. So even with the offensive pieces last year, they could not get it going because Murray wasn't doing enough. But now this year, he's really hit his stride. He looks great as a quarterback, looks great as a runner. We've seen good running backs that can throw win the MVP before. So I think Kyler Murray definitely has a chance. And right now, leading the number one team in the NFL, I think he deserves it.
Yeah, it will be interesting with Kyler Murray. How long that ankle injury keeps him out? Will it affect his running ability when he's back? Will it affect his passing? How will it affect the team overall? But that is another good pick. And I'm going to stay in the NFC because I think it's a race, and the guy that nobody wants to mention, but it's probably going to leads the league in passing, or he might have got passed since his team was on a bye. He was heading into Week 9, he led the league in passing, and that's Tom Brady at 40, 78, whatever, how old he is, still balling out, playing great. The Bucks are, like we mentioned, a scary team, but Tom Brady is playing well, and if we're going to talk about MVPs, you got to talk about Tom Brady, and you also got to say, did you know that Russell Wilson has never got an MVP vote? That's pretty much all we got to talk about for MVPs. That's a little bit of our midseason review. But before we go, we got to hit.
Hold on. I figured I should mention, just because if there's any bettors out there right now, the top four for in odds for MVP, Josh Allen is number one, which none of us mentioned, tied with Tom Brady, Kyler Murray, and Matt Stafford. So we hit the three, but we did not talk about Josh Allen.
Because he just lost to the Jags.
Yeah, but he's still, after that,
6-6.
even tied for first in MVP odds.
And I think before this week, Josh Allen would have been my number one, personally. But then this week happened. So it's tough.
Yeah, I still think Josh Allen is there, but I think we talked about how good the NFC is. I think it's just going to be from one of the top teams in the NFC. But as I was trying to do before George interrupted me to give you all that great advice, let's move into some Week 10 waivers.
Week 10 waiver wire, and you guys, if you don't know, you can go over to the couchgms.com where I post my top waivers for the week, but maybe my top waivers are not your guys' top waivers. So want to hear, is there anybody that you agree with me on in the articles, or anyone you want to add on for the fans? Cody, why don't you start? I know you have someone to add on.
Yeah, I have a guy to add on. George did a great job. He gave you a lot of wide receivers. I'm going to talk a running back, and I'm going to start off with Devin Singletary. Now, this is more of a 1 week play, depending on who your bye weeks are. You might need a guy. Maybe it could be multiple weeks if Zach Moss's concussion is long term. But if Zach Moss is out, we saw Devin Singletary was a viable option week 1 when Zach Moss was inactive. You can expect that again. I know it's going to be scary starting a Buffalo Bill. Their offense hasn't looked great the last few games. They're going to bounce back. It was a 1 week, whatever you want to call it, this weird daylight savings weekend that everybody was off. I expect him to put up more than 6 points, and I think Devin Singletary would be a solid add and probably pretty cheap in DFS too as we head into the later in the week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody's tired of me going Homer, but a guy that you should just look at, potentially stashing, not starting, is Devonte Freeman. If you look in the article, George does mention Adrian Peterson as a potential pickup, but the Titans, one thing they proved to me on the Sunday Night Football game was even without Derrick Henry, even with their running back still not knowing the offense yet, they still proved to me that they want to be a run-first team. They still tried forcing the run even when it wasn't working, which means moving forward, they're going to run the ball a lot. Adrian Peterson would make sense as that number one running back, but Devonte Freeman, with just as little time learning the playbook, did do better with his carries than Adrian Peterson did. Peterson did double his carries. He did get the goal line work. So like I'm saying, I think Peterson right now makes the most sense, but Foreman is worth a speculative add. The Titans have no ties to Adrian Peterson long term, no big contract, no love with him. So if Foreman does perform better, there's no reason that they won't make him the starter over AP.
That backfield is definitely in flux, and it's so hard to judge. I'll just back up my pick really fast to say the reason I picked Adrian Peterson is because of the goal line work, and we know how touchdowns can be important, but you really don't know who the lead back is going to be, so it is not a bad idea to throw a speculative ad out there on somebody like a Dante Foreman. I'm going to move on. I'm going to stay on the running back position, actually, just because I didn't feel like I didn't have that many, and I want to back up one of my picks here, which was Jordan Howard. So I know we've been all over the place on the Eagles' backfield as well, but I think now we've kind of seen if they're going to be behind in the game, it's Boston Scott's the guy. And then if they're going to be in a game like they were with the Chargers this week, even though we might not have expected it, it's Jordan Howard. So now next week they're going against Denver and then New Orleans after that. You're probably going to see one more week without Miles Sanders, potentially two. Both of those games with the way the Eagles are playing, there's a chance they could hang in with those two offenses. So if that's the case, Jordan Howard's going to be a decent play because he's going to have the chance to get the carries. The Eagles are trying to put emphasis on the run game. And on top of that, Jordan Howard's getting touchdowns. So I do not hate that play for the next 2 weeks because the Eagles are trying to feed a running back, especially when they're in a game.
And let me throw out two more guys real quick. One, if you're looking for a receiver, Elijah Moore, the rookie for the Jets, is starting to come alive. He's only 11.8% rostered. And this week, he had 8 targets, 7 receptions for 84 yards and 2 touchdowns after a week where he got 10 against the Bengals and then 10 against New England the week before. He is finally starting to make a name for himself. The Jets are starting to show that Zach Wilson goes down, let's just air it out more, which makes no sense to me, but I love every second of it as a football fan. So Elijah Moore is worth looking at. And another guy, if he is available, which is a big if, I hate the Ravens backfield. I hate focusing on it, but it looks like Devonte Freeman is the guy that's really starting to step up as that number one. He is 24% rostered. So just wanted to extra hammer home. Devonte Freeman is worth looking at if you need a running back, and he is still out there. Go get him because I know how thin the running back position is getting now. But George, one quick question to you, as a guy that loves James Conner from earlier. Now we've seen the Cardinals like to use that 2 running back system, and we know that Chase Edmonds is down now. Do you give any love or any speculative ads to Eno Benjamin, who did get a touchdown this week for the Cardinals?
Now, definitely, I do get that he's going to get work without Chase Edmonds in there because they're going to use 2 backs. I don't love him as much because I don't know if I'm going to love the amount of rushes he's going to get, and I don't love that he's not going to get that much red zone work most likely. But he's definitely worth a speculative ad because the Cardinals, as much as they have been using the pass game with Kyler Murray, they're still a run-first team. Kyler's going to take some carries, but he could end up being somebody that if you're in bye week trouble coming here down the stretch, or they end up having a good matchup and you expect him to be up, Benjamin could be a solid flex play for you. He's just not my favorite play in that backfield. So because of that, I did not include him in the article, but definitely worth an ad if you're desperate for the running back position.
Yeah, I'm going to give you one more running back real quick that just take a look at. He's just under 60% owned, and that's Kenyon Drake. He's had over 10 fantasy points the last 3 weeks. He's getting more involved in the Raiders offense. Josh Jacobs, we know, has some injuries that he's dealing with. He's injury prone as of this season. So just a guy, Kenyon Drake should be a name that you should be watching. And one more Raider that I am going to talk about, and we didn't even talk about this on the show. No, it's not Brian Edwards. You would think it is.
He's one of your favorites.
But it's Desean Jackson.
Okay.
Desean Jackson is getting signed to the Oakland Raiders. Mike Mayock said the deal is done.
Oakland.
He's getting signed to the Vegas
That's
Raiders,
right.
maybe.
Can they go back to Oakland? They deserve to be in Oakland. The Las Vegas Raiders instantly would slot him in for the Henry Ruggs role. He's probably not a guy you're going to start right away, but we've seen Jackson's. He had a good game earlier in this year with the Rams. He still has the speed that he could be fantasy relevant down the stretch. So maybe if you're set for this week, or you're not in need of an instant start guy, go ahead and grab Desean Jackson.
Another guy before we go here to check your wire and insta start tight end, Logan Thomas. He is only owned in 59.4% of leagues. If you're in those 40% of leagues of somebody that dropped Logan Thomas because they didn't have the ability to keep him with his injury, he needs to be owned. He can be started right away when he comes back. And the football team is opening his practice window this week. So at the longest, it's going to be 3-week wait on him. He's probably going to be back this week or next. Be sure to check your wire for Logan Thomas.
Okay, I got to throw out one more. I'm sorry. I know we keep pushing this, but look, it's a guy that we honestly do need to start talking about. We talked about how we don't trust the Falcons, right? We don't trust that their players are going to do anything, but honestly, the Falcons do put up points. And I love Corduro Patterson. But he's not going to be able to catch all the passes. I love Kyle Pitts, but he's not going to be able to catch all the passes. There's a guy who kind of emerged this week, and I'm curious if you guys think he's worth a speculative add too. Alameda Zaccheaus, 0.1% owned. He did catch 2 touchdown passes this week. It's his second week of the season where he has broken 10. Now, I understand he hasn't really done too much this year, but he's looking like he might emerge as one of the top receivers in that system with Calvin Ridley out now. Russell Gage doesn't seem like he's taking the role like I thought he would. Are you guys looking at Zaccheaus at all?
Now, when I was making the article, I was looking at Gage and Zaccheaus very closely. And I was very disappointed last week when I saw the first game without Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage didn't get a target. But now seeing a week where the coaching staff could put a game plan together without Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage got 8 targets, Zaccheaus got 3. Turned 2 of those targets into touchdowns, which is why I had such a big breakout week. But I don't know if the focal point of the offense is really Zaccheaus right now. If they decide that Gage isn't producing the way they want and they start giving him more of those wide receiver one, I guess it'd still be like third option in the offense, but type roles, then I would start looking that way. But for right now, it seems like the wide receiver they want to get involved behind Patterson and behind Pitts is Gage. We just got to see if he runs with it or if it ends up being Zaccheaus getting the shot in a few weeks because Gage keeps disappointing.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I agree with George on that, but I think we hit a lot of waivers. There's definitely more you can check out on at thecouchgms.com. Before we go, we got to preview the Thursday night game, so let's get into our Thursday night preview.
Thursday night football this week, we got the Baltimore Ravens traveling down south to the Miami Dolphins. And we can just start by breaking down the Dolphins because I feel like there's a little bit less. They didn't have a bad game without Tua this week, which is more than we could say the first 4 weeks they were without Tua. I want to start with Jalen Waddle because I posed this question to Cody a little earlier. He didn't give me a clear answer. Waddle had a 14-point game again now. Is he someone that's in your starting lineup most weeks or every week?
I think he has officially reached the confidence flex option for me with RB2 potential. RB. We're not talking about Cordero Patterson. We're talking about Jalen Waddle. He's wide receiver 2 potential. And I think it is worth noting that Tua was expected to throw Monday. We still don't know his status for the game. It's something we should keep an eye on. But I think he's even better of an option when Tua is out there. I know he did just put up a decent amount of points with Jacoby Brissett, but I do like him with Tua out there. So to George, to answer your question, I think Waddle is slowly entering that weekly starter.
Man, I can't wait to see the Tua hype video for returning to play. It's coming. I'm excited for it.
I'll make it for you, Tua, if you want it. Let's just send some footage over my way. We'll make
Tua,
something happen.
Just find it on YouTube. Do it yourself.
If Tua is just a guest on the podcast for 5 minutes, we will make him the coolest hype video he's ever seen. But the other guy from Miami that you got to talk about is Gaskin. And this dude is probably one of the most frustrating players in fantasy this season. If every time I'm like, oh, it's finally time for Gaskin, he just disappears. And then when I'm like, all right, Gaskin's done, don't start him anymore, then he breaks out on my bench. So I'll let you tell me, against the Ravens defense, how much are you trusting Gaskin this week?
I can't answer that question because he's a guy that I overhype each week. But if I'm trying to be as objective as possible, I'm trying not to play him. That doesn't mean I'm going to reach to start like Benjamin or, he's probably like a guy we just talked about. Like I'd still start Gaskins over them. He still gets He gets passing work, he gets yardage. If they get to the goal line, he's still the goal line back. So I don't think it's the worst play, but it's a guy I'm trying to pivot off of if I have, a potential fill in.
I'm just going to look forward for a second at buys. You're missing the Bears next week, so David Montgomery. You're missing the Bengals, so Joe Mixon. And you're missing the Giants, so the potential Saquon Barkley. There's a lot of running backs that are fantasy difference makers you're not going to have next week. That's not even counting all the injuries we've already got going on. That alone has to put him in flex conversation because there's not that many better options. But I would definitely try to look another way just because the Ravens defense has been tough at times at least. And there's a chance that the Ravens could jump up. And if that happens, the Dolphins have already shown they're not going to use Gaskin when they're behind.
Screw it. You got to start Gaskin. His best game of the season had 22 points against the Buccaneers. If he can do that, he can do that against the Ravens. Because no one...
If they want to involve him in the pass game, but that's not even a guarantee. That's why he got 22 against the Buccaneers, but that's not been a consistent thing.
You're right. It hasn't been consistent, but it's looked a lot better since that game. I mean, he still had 6 catches this past week. It's not quite the 10 he had against Tampa Bay, but that's the week. Everybody benched him.
And he straws with his my guy.
Well, Tyler mentioned he has every time you put him on the bench, he has a big game. Everyone benched him against the Buccaneers. This seems like another game, and you mentioned all the guys that are out. Yeah, keep Gaskin in your lineup. No one else is going to tell you to do it but me. Keep Gaskin in your lineup.
All right. Well, is there anybody else on the Dolphins? I mean, you got Mike Gesicki. How much confident are you in Gesicki moving forward? I think he's been pretty consistent. He's one of the guys that you're just going to start because, look, there's really not that many better options out there. If you have a Darren Waller, a George Kittle, a Travis Kelce, you're not starting Mike Gesicki. If you don't have one of those guys, you're probably starting Mike Gesicki. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So we can go ahead and move on to the Ravens unless there's anybody else you guys want to throw out there from the Dolphins side.
Nope. Just want to say Will Fuller is not expected to be back. So that just helps George's case with Jalen Waddle. So they're expecting to give him the 10 days to fully recover. But Ravens, I think we got to talk about the Ravens running backs as we always do. You mentioned Freeman as a guy that you would probably pick up. Do you have the Dolphins run defense has been pretty bad. It seems like this will be a good week for the Ravens running back. I mean, Lamar Jackson is probably going to be like top 3 quarterback this week with all the rushing yards. But because the running back are so bad, does that affect the passing options too? Those are all questions you have going into this game. And it's tough that it's a Thursday night matchup, and these games often like set up your week. Like if you have a bad game on Thursday, you feel like you're not going to be able to come back. If you have a great game, you feel great going into the weekend. But I know I just threw a lot at both of you, but I'll let one of you decide if you want to start with wide receivers or running backs.
I'll start with it because you started.
Tyler, start off with running backs.
Yeah, you started me with a question, so I'm going to go with yes. I would start Devonte Freeman because of the fact that you just talked about where there's really not that many options out there at running back. If you are a guy who had a Derrick Henry, or if you're a guy who has one of the running backs on bye, a David Montgomery, a Saquon Barkley, one of those guys, I think your options are limited. And at this point, I think Devonte Freeman is better than a lot of the fringe running backs. He's getting usage. He's not getting a ton of volume. This week he did have 13 carries, which is honestly not bad. He has broken 10 in fantasy 3 consecutive weeks now, so he's starting to show some consistency. He's really emerging as the running back the Ravens want to use as their number one. They're still going to use all the running backs. You always have that threat of, if it's a running situation, Lamar's just going to keep it himself. And Lamar is throwing it a lot more, but the Ravens are a higher scoring offense this year. And I think that, Devonte Freeman is going to get most of the goal line work out of the running backs. And against a team like the Dolphins that might give up a lot of points with a high scoring offense, yeah, I think you have to start Devonte Freeman. I think he is a mid-tier running back too.
I like that. I'm not going to argue with you there because he's definitely my favorite running back of the group as well. I'll start highlighting the wide receivers because I think you definitely have to say that Marquise Brown's in your lineup in this juicy of a matchup. And I'll even throw Mark Andrews in here with the tight end situation. He's definitely in your lineup because he's just someone that's in your lineup every week. The person I have a question on is Rashad Bateman Because first you look at it, you're like, Dolphins, bad defense. Rashad Bateman has been somebody who's been getting 8 targets a week now. He hasn't really broken 10 or had his breakout game, but he also hasn't scored a touchdown yet. He's somebody who would be in flex conversation in my mind, but you're also looking at they could run the ball more here. So I'm going to say he's in flex conversation. Do you guys agree with me that Bateman's somebody you'd think about this week, or are you still holding off another week just to see?
Well, let
I,
me ask you this: if you're going to talk about Bateman, a guy who is not scoring a touchdown but he's getting volume, um, let's just take matchup completely out of it. Who do you trust more? Jacoby Myers being a number 1 receiver who doesn't catch touchdowns, or Rashad Bateman, a guy who doesn't catch touchdowns but he has more upside? Because if you're leaning towards a guy like Jacoby Myers, I think I'm leaning towards not starting a Rashad Bateman in a week like this. If you lead Bateman, I'd go Bateman.
I'm thinking Bateman in that situation. But I mean, there's also less tape on Bateman too. He's still kind of coming to his own. He's only played 3 games, but no, I think I'm leaning Bateman in that one.
So
I'd go Myers over Bateman.
That's where I would
Okay.
gauge his value at right now. He's about a Jacoby Myers. He's getting the volume, he's getting the catches, but he is not getting the touchdowns. Myers is proving that he's a number 1 receiver. He can still put up the numbers despite not getting touchdowns, where he can be a consistent flex usage player. So if you like Bateman more than Myers, then yes, I think you can use him as a flex. But if Myers being a borderline flex guy, if you don't view him as good as Myers, I wouldn't be starting him on your lineup. I would find somebody else.
Yeah,
I like that comparison. That was good.
yeah. I think Bateman, especially if we're going to throw matchups back into it. We just talked about how bad the run defense for the Dolphins have been this season. Like they're gonna, we expect this game to get the Ravens to get up early, just run the ball. Could be a good game for Freeman, and Bateman is coming along, but I would still say he's option number 3 behind Mark Andrews and Hollywood Brown. So in a game where you expect them to be up, just something to keep in the back of your mind too. But if you might have to. Bateman is, I feel like people are really holding on to Bateman because they're seeing Jamar Chase like be a rookie phenom. They're like, well, Bateman's finally getting healthy. Maybe he can be that guy. We've been holding out so much hope for him. But maybe you should just temper your expectations.
Definitely. And I mean, we'll see if he comes along any more in these next few weeks. But as we said, maybe stay away from him if you can, unless you're, say, missing 2 of those big Bengals wide receivers in your lineup this week. I know Tyler is in one of his leagues.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add back to the running backs, I do like Freeman this week. He's not supposed to. Latavius Murray, I imagine they will keep him out one more week. But I'm very interested to see how that goes moving forward if Latavius goes back to the number 1 option. But like I said, he's not supposed to be back this week. So Freeman should be good to go. Other than that, I think, who knows? Thursday night games have been weird this year. This one could be another, one that we expect to be a blowout that ends up being a close game. But is there anything else you guys want to hit on before we head out for this matchup? We good to go?
No.
They're all
I would
shaking their
say
head.
No,
That
I think
means
we're good.
we're all thinking that the Ravens are the clear winner here, and the Dolphins are going to lose. But I think if Week 9 of the NFL has taught us anything, it's that you can't count out anyone. Anyone can win at any time. Honestly, if you just count the NFL in general this season, uh, anything can happen. So it could still be a very good game. Betters beware. Vegas is killing it this year. So um, I'm interested to see if this game plays out a lot closer. Look, and one more thing is I've been saying all earlier in the podcast that the reason I don't believe the Ravens are that team that should be considered best in the AFC is because they have been playing down to the level of whoever they play. They're still winning, but they're making every game a close battle. Here is a game where they should dominate. If the Ravens come out and dominate the way they should, I think they can start to be considered the best team in the AFC. If the Ravens come out, play to the level of the Dolphins, win in a crazy overtime or last second Justin Tucker field goal, I think once again the Ravens are not putting themselves on that level they're supposed to be at.
good words of advice. And it's also worth noting, I don't have the full numbers in front of me, but at least against the spread, I know the home team dominates that in terms of betting. So the Dolphins are the home team. They always keep the games close. Should be a fun matchup on Thursday night, but it's been a little bit longer. We did our mid-season review. It's great to have Tyler back with us. But as always, thanks again for listening to another episode of the Couch GMs podcast.